This is your girl whispers ASMR. Does resin, or Jodi ASMR does resin. I've recently changed my channel name, so I just wanted everybody to know that it's me, your girl Jodi. We do resin and tell scary stories. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on these, and I'm going to continue to do them. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do. At this time, it's free and it helps me out a lot, and I would really appreciate it. If you like this kind of content, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Thank you so much. Or hit that like button. I'm gonna continue telling scary stories and doing resin. Now today I've done the pour already. I did the blue last night, and then I put a clear coat over it this morning. The bowls I did last night, and then this morning I did the far one you cannot see. I filled it a little bit more with clear. I've been having really good results with these. So here's some I don't think you've seen. This is the blue and the clear, and I just think they're coming out incredibly. So, today we are going to be doing near-death experiences while hiking. I visited about 2 months ago, mid-October, in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I have told this story quite a few times already, but I wanted to have it in writing. A little back story. My friend Ryan and I are 19-year-old college students. We both enjoy hiking quite a bit. Have a fair amount of experience. We decided to climb the gauntlet of hikes in this area, Mount Washington, which has a peak of 6,288 feet. Double that of anything we have ever done. We live in New York, so the trip to Mount Washington was about 6 hours. This is a big commitment to go and do this. We left my university at 4 a.m., stopped for a big breakfast, and managed to get to the mountain base by 11 a.m. We needed to maximize our daylight as the up and back hike time was expected to be around 6.5 hours. So the up and back is about 6.5 hours. Even though it was mid-October, we were aware that it was going to be cold, around 20 degrees. We picked out 5 layers of clothing, 2 pairs of gloves, and socks. We had thought we had planned this trip early enough in the year to avoid snow. We did not have any waterproof gear and snowshoes. Boy, were we wrong. Starting out, the hike was very serene. Just a light layer of snow. Everything was very peaceful. It was warm enough to forgo our outermost layers. We ran into several groups of people coming down the mountain on our way up. We asked each group, "Did you make it to the top?" And the response was the same: no. At first, this was understandable, but then further we went up, the more groups we saw, and the responses became more and more disconcerting. About 2 hours into the hike, we were nearing the top of the tree line. The light dusting of snow was now closer to 3 to 5 inches deep. So steeper inclines and icy conditions produced a few dangerous spots, especially due to the narrow path, but nothing we had not dealt with in the past. As I said before, we were pretty avid hikers. We were about to ascend past the tree line, ran into one last group, a dad and a son. We asked this group the same question, and their response gave us fair warning. It's like a whole different world past this tree line, guys. I sure hope you came prepared. Words cannot describe how true those words were without the coverage of the tree line. There was nothing to stop the fierce winds that, coupled with the increase in altitude, complete cloud coverage, and what appeared to be a foot of snow, made the mountain look like a scene out of an Everest movie. But we're not about to just turn around. We could see off in the distance what appeared to be the peak of the mountain. Well, that is very deceiving, unfortunately. On top of these conditions, the trail was also a great deal steeper. It took us a good hour or so to push to the peak we had seen upon getting there, we realized that this was only the beginning. Ahead of us was a long, narrow straightaway with drop-offs on both sides. After that was another steep section so big that we could not even see the top through the clouds. If there was a point to turn back, this was it. Time was a huge factor. It was 2 by this point, and we only had until 6 before the sun started to set. Also, the conditions had started to take their toll. Water had gotten through Ryan's shoes, and it had my gloves, and my scarf was frozen solid. Unaware of how much more there really was, we decided to keep going. At this point, the wind was really bad. We had to crouch it down to avoid being thrown off the straight. Nevertheless, it was a nice break in our legs from the climb. We reached the base of the next, and what we hoped was the final climb. We got some water in us, switched gloves, and continued. This section was even more brutal than the last. It seemed to go on forever, and the thought of turning around became more and more prevalent in our minds. The snow continued to get deeper and deeper and deeper. So much so that the only trail markers were large piles of rocks with cloth tied to them. It took us another hour and a half to reach the top of this section. When we got there, we again realized that there were more of the hike than we thought. The only thing that kept us going at this point was the promise of a warm building at the top, a visitor center type thing. So we trekked on, and yes, if you've ever been to Mount Washington, there is a beautiful visitor center at the top, but it is a long way, and it is very deceiving. I have done this full hike. The thing about Mount Washington, he's right, you can kind of see as you're going on, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to make it to that peak. No, I'm going to make it to that peak. It is very deceiving. It takes a lot longer than you really think it does. So, there's in hopes of finding a warm visitor center, right? Well, that was not my experience either, so we'll see what happens to them. About another 30 minutes, we found another group coming down. This was surprising, as we had not seen anyone in what seemed like a lifetime. This group was much more prepared than us. Waterproof clothing, snowshoes, snow bikes. We assumed by this point the peak must be right around the corner. We asked the group how much farther we had. They responded, I'd say about 0.7 miles to go. We can do it. My mouth dropped. 0.7 miles at this incline would be an eternity. By this point, I really had no choice, though. It was 3:30, and there was no way we were making it down the mountain before sunset. On top of that, the cold was really starting to set into our bones. All I could think about was that warm building at the top. The rest of the hike was really easily the most grueling physical challenge I've ever bared. The steepest section of the trail went through snow that was past my waistline. The wind was hitting us harder than ever. It was at this point I started to become genuinely worried for our lives. One of us could have dropped from sheer exhaustion at any time. It was that tiring. Yes, it is. It is unbelievably tiring. We pushed on for what felt like an eternity again. We were both well aware at this point that the warm building at the top was our only option. We extremely frightening feeling, I can tell you that. I can promise you that. Promise you that. Finally we stumbled upon the peak, and the winds were so horrendous we could hardly see a thing. My hands had become so cold that they were now in severe pain. Frostbite was setting in. Instead of being one building at the top, there were several. We could not distinguish which building was the visitor center. So we went door to door trying to get in. Door after door, everything was locked. Everything was closed. We began going in circles, confused by the sheer desert of white, poor visibility, and similar structures of the buildings. Now fear really started to set in. I came to the realization that if we could not get into any of these buildings, we'd have to break in. There was simply no other option. No other option. We were getting cold, really cold, dangerously cold. Then we split up to recheck all of the buildings. The next door I went to, I was certain was the only one we'd left unchecked. I put my hand in the icy cold handle and pulled. Locked. I looked out into the nothingness of the peak and felt the despair fall over me. Was this how I was going to die? Suddenly I heard Ryan call out to me frantically, "Eddie, come over here." Someone came to the door. I rushed over, relieved to hear these words. Ryan knocked on the door. "I can hear him coming," he said. "He's right around the corner." I listened closely to the door and heard absolutely nothing. I waited there for a solid minute. No one came to the door. Now I felt easily the most profound terror I have ever in my life. I considered the possibility that Ryan had encountered no one and that he was hallucinating because of the circumstances. If that was the case, we surely would have been doomed. To our great relief, someone did eventually come to the door. Although we were not all too welcome at first, we were able to take shelter and warm up in the visitor center. We bought headlamps from the gift shop and learned of an extensive road that led to the bottom of the mountain, 10 miles on the road and 2-mile trail through the woods. We were able to make it back to my car by around 9:30 at night. We later learned that the temperature at the park that day was negative 19 degrees with the wind chill a hell of a lot more colder than we had thought. A lot more colder than we had thought, seeing as we thought it was 20 degrees. And the winds got up to 70 miles per hour. All in all, an amazing experience to say the least, but easily the most dangerous thing I've ever done. How about near-death experiences in Yosemite? I was doing the JMD 5 years ago and would fail from smoke in a few days, so much less crowded than normal. By myself, 300 yards in the trail just past Sunrise HSC near the temporary creek. Taking down my tent and eating breakfast, turned around to 3 coyotes sneaking up on me from behind 2 feet away. I raise holy hell, stand up straight and wave my arms. They pause for 30 seconds and then take off. When they start running, the 4 other coyotes around me, 10 to 15 feet away, also take off. I'm hoping they were going for my food. I don't think they actually were going to attack me. However, they could have. So I was on the plane yesterday when I flew down to Florida and for the day, and I was talking to this guy, Bill, on the first flight with me, and we were talking about hiking and all sorts of stuff. And he said when he lived in Wyoming when he was a kid, he was spent his whole childhood growing up on snowmobiles, so he and his brother go out and they're on snowmobiles while he is in the back, and then there are two people in front of him. But the problem is when you're hiking in high winds or a lot of snow and you're in front of somebody, you can't hear them even if they're screaming bloody murder, and if they don't turn around and check in you, you're really by yourself. So he said that his snowmobile had run out of gas, and for the next 15 or 20 minutes, he sat there praying to God his brother would eventually turn around and notice he was not there. But as he turned and looked back behind him, there was a pack of wolves. Now, this man was carrying a gun. 2 guns, actually, he said. And he pulled out the gun, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna scare these guys away, because these wolves are enormous. They're gray wolves. He said their backs were 30 inches high off of the ground, and their paws were probably this big around. And I'm not kidding, they are enormous creatures if you've never seen one. You don't want to see one up close, or when you are hiking in the woods. Paws this big, no kidding. So he takes his gun out. He's got 6 rounds in that gun, and he's got 6 rounds in the next. And he decides he's gonna shoot a round in the air to scare them away. They didn't even flinch. They come towards him. His heart stopped, he said, and he's like, I'm going to die. I was like, oh my God, that's terrifying. So he said, yeah, well, so he's like, okay, I'm gonna shoot one closer to them. I'm not gonna hurt anybody. He shoots one right by them, not killing anybody, but just to scare them. They didn't budge. They all are staring at him. He said there's like 15 or 20 of them. Enormous. And the closer they get, the more terrified he is. And he's thinking, these guys do not care. It isn't the dead of winter, it's negative 30 degrees. I'm starting to freeze to death, and these animals know this. And they don't care if I kill one of them, because they've got so many. So as they reach him closer and closer, all of a sudden he hears this roar of a snowmobile come up from behind him, and he sees his brother jumping this little ledge and right into the pack of wolves, scaring the crap out of them. His brother rescued him, but his brother said that when he was coming around far away, he could see, this is how flat this was. He said he could see the actual wolves and coming after his brother, so he decided to go around the wolves and come up behind them, fly over the ledge, and land hopefully close enough to scare the crap out of him. That's exactly what he did. That was the most terrifying thought, that you shoot at a wild animal and they don't run for their lives. They start moving towards you, and you're by yourself. It's negative 30 degrees outside, and what do you do? That is absolutely the most, I don't even know how to, I don't know. I really have no idea how to even put into words the fear on his face when he's telling me the story, how genuinely afraid he was. I can't even imagine. Even coyotes. We had coyotes in my backyard last week. They were right there. There must have been 10 of them, a whole pack. And they were howling. And I wondered what was my dog. Maya was visibly shaken. She was scared. And I was like, something has been wrong with Maya all day. Well, we come home from taking Sienna, my daughter, to skating on Friday. And this is last Friday. Usually we all get inside, make sure the dogs are not out, get all the dogs in. Everybody's kind of huddled together because they're not even 100 feet from us. The next day I go out to my backyard and I'm walking along the fence and I see this animal that is torn apart. And I immediately realize that's what they were howling about. They had killed something. It looked like a fox or bunny or something like that. And they were crying to their pack that ours, it's our food, you know, how they do. So that was a little bit terrifying. Not as terrifying as the wolf story. I don't think I've ever heard anything so terrifying. It's difficult to say how near death this experience was looking back. And after doing some research, I think I was in a pretty bad position. My first backpacking trip I did was in Yosemite Park up to Young Lakes for 2 nights. I had never hiked in elevation before. That's not good. Before I did not know how altitude sickness worked. Let me just interject here because I do hike a lot in altitude, like 13,000 feet. So the only reason I have used this, I use oxygen that they have now in a can, and I believe in it. I use it every single time, even if I'm just out there, just hanging out, because it really does prevent altitude sickness. So if you take oxygen with you, it is so much better on your body, and it instantly revives you, because you can get extremely sick from altitude sickness. So this man had never hiked in altitude before, and he had no idea how this worked. Looking back, this was very stupid on my part. We arrived there after what seemed like a very difficult hike, as I was out of shape at the time and my backpack was far too heavy. Day 1, everything seemed okay. I was tired, but did not seem like anything was wrong. By day 2, I didn't feel great and was getting very fatigued doing very simple tasks. That night I developed a cough and literally could not sleep. Anytime I would lay down, I'd start coughing uncontrollably. By that morning, when it was time to leave, I threw up, had not eaten, and hardly drank anything. Golden rules of hiking: eat, drink tons of water, and never get into water if you can help it. Only if it's the last option. So I'd start coughing uncontrollably. By that morning, when it was time to leave, I threw up, had not eaten again, and did not drink anything. The hike out felt impossible. I would walk a few feet and stop due to coughing and losing my breath. Folks on the trail were extremely friendly and helpful, offering anything they could to help me out. I remember one woman asking my wife if I always looked like that pale. We finally got to the trailhead where the car was, and my wife drove us to the Groveland where we stayed. I was completely delirious on that ride and don't remember any of it, including the rest of the evening. By morning I felt somewhat better, but when we got home I could not walk up the stairs without coughing. After doing some research, I believe I had a pretty severe case of altitude sickness, possibly fluid in my lungs due to the sound I made when I coughed. I'll never know how bad it actually was. I never saw a doctor and just assumed it would go away, planning on my part. The day was about 5 years ago. I now have a much better backpacking setup, and I'm very aware anytime I'm in high elevation and I'm in much better shape, I make sure I take necessary precautions. Look, people, elevation sickness is absolutely no joke. Be careful out there. person and a genius with computers. He loved to play chess. He loved to climb too, but I think the appeal for him was more romantic than physical. We had met at work and stayed friends when I moved on in my career. I started climbing 3 months before this accident with Don as my instructor. Oh my goodness, he was our instructor. I continued to climb for many years after the accident and eventually became quite good at the sport. We were both in excellent physical condition from pre-season weightlifting, racquetball, jogging, and climbing on rocks. Closer to home in San Francisco East Bay area, Don owned a substantial amount of technical equipment and literature on the subject. He was a data process manager. I was an accountant. We were married with children in our late 30s. So my first writing of this account in May 1984 was only the technical aspects of the accident directed at climbers for instructional purposes. The second writing a couple months later was for the benefits of interested non-climbers, do's and don'ts kind of thing, just interest, down in my family and friends, and to satisfy my compulsion to get it all down in writing. I revised the story in 2007 for a general audience. I strongly suggest that non-climbers read my glossary first, so I will help you if it gets too complicated. This was my first trip to Yosemite as an adult, so we spent Saturday exploring the spectacular valley. Don was my tour guide, and I was awestruck by the majesty of the place and the climbing possibilities. We camped in the park and climbed Ranger Rock on Saturday. Climbed Ranger Rock, we ran into one of Don's climbing instructors, Don Reed, who recommended the overhang bypass route on Lower Cathedral Rock adjacent to Bridal Veil Falls, we started looking for the route before Don's truck had fully stopped. I was excited that we were finally climbing something of some significance. Bridal Veil Falls was a popular tourist stop and could be seen and photographed from a distance, and it is quite beautiful. The route, according to the guidebook, was airy and exposed, which can be interpreted as thrilling to climbers, scary to non-climbers. It would be an all-day effort with an ascent of around 800 vertical feet. The previous day's route on Ranger Rock had been fun, but it had seemed short and non-spectacular, excluding, of course, the views. But as far as physically, there was nothing spectacular about it. The difficulty rating of the overhang pass route was class 5.6. We didn't bring a photocopy of the route map to carry with us. Now that is a mistake. I traced from our guidebook onto the scrap piece of paper. We could see the route, but finding the approach was very difficult. We stashed some excess gear behind some rocks and headed in the general direction of the route. The approach... Are you kidding me? It has been all day. I've been sticking my fingers in this. Alright. The approach would turn into much more of an undertaking than we had expected. Equipment included in climbing shoes, swami belts, chalk bags, and belay plates each. Don's rack held assorted nuts and stoppers, 3 friends, 2 tricams, and assorted slings with carabiners. I carried the pack with my camera and boots, some band-aids and adhesive tape, granola bars and raisins, and a quart of water, and Don's 50-meter rope. It must have been around 10 a.m. when we headed up. Most good climbing routes necessitate some amount of effort in the form of an approach, some much more than others. Yosemite is famous for its accessibility to quality climbers. At this particular route, it only had a medium difficulty observation deck. I think I was in the sun for the first time that day. It felt good, even though I was warmed from approaching. We decided that we were probably not in the regular approach position, but we would eventually find the climb. I'm gonna say this, as much as I've climbed in my life, that is the worst. Is that worst? It is what you think at the time. It really is. You're thinking that, okay, we're in the general direction. It's not the way everybody goes, but we're gonna find it. I have never had a good outcome with this thought. Never. So they're thinking that they're gonna eventually find it. Parts of the route were occasionally coming into view, but we were going to have to rope up for safety much sooner than we expected. Twice we encountered some nasty biting ants that seemed to cover us and then bite us all at once, like red ants. This can be a real distraction when both of your hands are too busy climbing to brush them off. At one point, Don became quite agitated at catching his shirt in a brush. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I'm concerned about the hour. The descent is supposed to be as bad as the approach, and we're not even to the climb yet." "That's what I mean. It must have been between 1 and 3, a beautiful day. It would have sure been a disappointment to turn back," I thought. Neither of us suggested it. We swung leads for speed and were finally on fairly solid rock. Now he's talking about seriously rock climbing, like hanging off of the rock, and I don't do that, but the hikes I go on are very, it's freehand, but it's, I'm not hanging off of a steep ledge, but I can see the picture and I know where he's talking about. And this is a fully dropped ledge. It's not like a trail, because I can't find the trail. So it's important to avoid 50-foot falls, alright? Because they're only at 25-foot lead with no protection. That can expose you to a 50-foot fall. Okay, I mean, this is crazy. So one pitch, I led a long section of few opportunities to gear placement. In the middle of it, I was attacked by the biting ants with such intensity that I climbed past a good crack without placing a piece of protection. It was not difficult climbing, but fairly exposed. This is where he runs out at 25 feet. Now they're concerned, but they finally arrive at the actual climb around 3 p.m. and we should have retreated. Instead, we were irresponsibly optimistic and thought the short route would go fast en route. Finding on the descent would not be a problem that it had been on the approach. We forged ahead. I still had on my long underwear and annoyed Don by taking the time to change into my shorts. But this is very important because you don't want to get sweaty. You do not want to become sweaty, because then if it gets cold, if you have to spend the night out there, you won't have anything dry to put on or warm, and that's a terrible feeling. Not being able to warm up, which has happened to me. But luckily I lived. So just, if you're planning on doing anything like this, just keep that in mind, please. Okay, so Don led the first pitch and placed his smallest friend, which is like a spike, into a crack that I gave up trying to retrieve it as I followed. A $40 loss. I led next and thoroughly enjoyed the climbing. It was moderately difficult for the novice I was, exposed to high-quality rock and scenic. Once I climbed about 30 feet past a turn in the route and decided to be laid on from where I was and to climb after he had climbed to the turn to the route. I called him up. When we got to the turn in the route, he wanted to come to where I was, which would have compounded my error. "There's nothing up here," I said. "This isn't the way." He said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" with an angry tone. I replied, "I want you to take in the rope and put me on belay, and I'll climb down to you." The next thing he did didn't make sense. I had 135 feet of rope. Instead of stacking it next to him, he rigged it through his belay plate and started pulling at 135 feet through the plate, a difficult and unnecessary process. That is weird. He would do that for being such a advanced hiker. I didn't want to insult him and figured that he'd realize the mistake and take it out of the plate, but he didn't. He kept pulling it through. He was frustrated, jerking the rope because the belay plate was jamming. Finally, I said, "Don, just take it out of the plate and stack it." And he said, "Okay." He realized right away that his student was right, so eventually I climbed down to him. The switch to the right went up a bit to some little trees and then sloped down a little. Luckily, it was in fact the route. I said, "I'll lead up this thing. If this is the ledge, what should I find? Let me see the map." He said, "I've already looked at the map. There should be a ledge with trees on it and walk off." I asked again, and he said, "I've looked at the map. Just do it." Okay. Something is up with that. Nobody with a professional background and with all these classes and this type of history of climbing would say that, because if somebody novice you're with wants to look at the map, if they're leading, my gosh, that is what they need to do to just feel secure. Don't do this to anybody. Oh my goodness, and don't let anybody do this to you. I led up and across the ledge, moving past protecting with the little trees, and I came to the top of the big death roll. There was a 5.6 to 5.7 face above me, and I was looking for something easier. Don knew there was more climbing, but I hadn't looked at the map in a while and was confused. I thought there was a ledge walk off, but I was wrong. He meant walk off to face climb, and thought he meant walk off the whole route. So I went all the way to the big diathral, and at the top there was a rock with some webbing on a rappel ring. I thought we were completely off course, and this wasn't the ledge at all. I had a feeling of foreboding, and the whole vicinity looked somehow ominous to me. It is amazing how quickly it all becomes so overwhelming and foreboding, and how your mind just goes from "I can do this" to "Oh my God, I'm gonna die." So I took one look over the edge and one quick look up for a route. There was nothing but sheer faces either way. I turned and started my retreat before yelling "rope" to Don for my belay. We had been having trouble talking to each other all day. The sound of the waterfall made it twice as hard. It was spring and the rivers were full, beautiful to watch, but impeded to climbers who had to shout at each other. We were tired and hungry and thirsty, and it was clear that Don was annoyed, and his annoyance seemed to be with me. I got him to pull the rope back and went back to where I could yell down to him and said, "Don, this isn't the way. All that's over there is a big rock." He was furious. Clearly furious. When I got to him, he pulled the map out and said, "Of course, it's the book. That's right where the book is supposed to be. You're right on route. You should have stayed there," and belayed me over. We had never argued on a climb before. I said, "I'm sorry, I was confused. You lead. I'll do whatever you want." He was the knowledgeable climber. I was just leading to learn how to lead. At this point, Don complained of being thirsty, and he was starting to look thirsty. So I said, "Here, take the water." We'd been trying to conserve it, so he drank a few swallows left. Don led back across the ledge, and he was really hurrying. He stopped 20 feet or so before the top of the book, and I joined him. The sun was down now, and light had faded to where was rational all along, but he was getting a little frantic. We really hurried across the ledge. I told him at one point that this shouldn't be so desperate. I also suggested we just sit down and spend the night. He replied it would be awfully damn cold, and I figured he was right about that. It had been freezing at night in the valley. At one point he said, "We gotta get off this rock," but I think he meant off of the steep part onto the fourth glass slope. There was no way we were going to get all the way down in the light. I think we both knew that now. It was around 6 p.m. and dusk. This is terrifying. I'm getting goosebumps. We decided against all good sense to rappel the pig to the roll. Rappels are usually made with a double rope so it can be retrieved from the bottom by pulling one end. In fact, that's what rappel means, to take back. Don looked for the center mark of the rope. He couldn't find it, so I looked with him. The tape marker had come off. That's okay, I said. They don't have to be exactly equal. Unbeknownst to us, this cathedral was about 100 feet tall and vertical. Oh my god, way too long for our doubled 50-meter rope. It was actually an alternate climbing route called overhang overpass, but much more difficult than our overhang bypass route. Its difficulty was at a rating of 5.11 C and an ability level that I would approach after many years of climbing and training, but never quite attain. Holy shit. The original route map, but not my traced copy, had a tiny arrow to indicate the proper rappel route. It would have required only a short backtrack on the ledge for a much safer descent. It was a major error to rappel this cathedral. That and our now rapid loss of daylight set the stage for a horrific experience at best and the loss of both of our lives at the worst. Don pulled the rope through the rappel ring until it looked about center. The 1-inch nylon sling and metal rappel ring both looked new and strong. The sling was wrapped around a big anchor rock 3 or 4 times. A couple of much older and weathered slings were laying on the ground. There was some discussion about whether to have both rope ends in one big knot or a separate knot in each rope. The ends of the rappel rope are always knotted to prevent the rappler from sliding off the end in case he runs out of rope before he runs out of clip. That would be terrifying. No, this is very scary. I have been in this situation, but not hanging off the side of a cliff. I can't even imagine the feeling of utter despair I would have had. I don't know. So, I wanted separate knots. It seemed to me that if we had misjudged the center, we could slip a little of the long end through the belay blade. Don knotted one end of the rope while I knotted the other. Don looked at my knot, commented that isn't enough, and tied it himself with a longer tail. He then threw each end off and felt their weight. Next he picked up both ropes and bent them to pass through a belayed blade. He looked at me and said, "Who's going first?" He was pissed. In fact, he looked grim. I volunteered immediately. I wanted to appease him. As I roped up, Don asked, "What if the rope isn't long enough?" "I don't know," I answered. I thought that the cathedral was only 60 feet. I really didn't have a plan if that happened, but it occurred to me that since the rope doubled, there was plenty of extra because a single rope would have been plenty. Then again, I thought the double rope would absolutely reach. He didn't offer a solution, even though he had asked an important question. This, I think, is where they made the biggest mistake, because the question went unanswered. I walked to the edge, turned, jerked the rope once to test the anchor, and started to back off. I think we both knew by now that we were doing something very stupid and dangerous, but for some reason we kept going. prospect of spending the night so exposed, just dumb optimism that nothing bad would happen to us kept us going. I would never again proceed with such an idiotic plan, but it was a costly lesson. Don said, if you need me to pull either end of the rope, let me know. I nodded, took a step back, and said, this is the top rope. As I lifted the rope highest on my belay plate, I gestured and repeated, the top rope. I had never named a rope before and hadn't since, but for some reason I guessed that we might need to identify this particular rope end. Don nodded and I backed over the edge. I knew the rappel would be uncomfortable with only a swami belt. I had done it before. In fact, I had never rappelled with anything but a swami belt. I knew if I leaned back and got down quickly, it would be okay. Look forward to getting back to the familiar fourth class section and off this ominous precipice. Since we were now rappelling as opposed to climbing, it didn't occur to me that I was about to lead a pitch without any gear. Oh my god. Oh my god. A pitch is like a drop off. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my gosh, a mistake of the inexperienced Don had the rack and slings. I had the back. There was still a dim light in the sky, but it may have been dark enough to start seeing stars. The first 10 feet weren't steep. The rest was either vertical or slightly overhung. The further down I went, this is scary, the harder it was to keep my feet on the wall. The swami belt was suffocating me. To hurry, I lifted an arm's length of rope at a time, and my right hand pulled the belay plate away from the cabinier with my left, dropped and repeated the process. This jerking action bruised my ribs and rope burned my hand. I felt like I was drowning. Twice I turned upside down, transferring my weight to my hips and catching my breath, but I couldn't make progress upside down. I was scared. It occurred to me that my nose was bleeding. I managed to get my best rest by gaining toe and hand jams in the 1.5-inch crack which ran the length of the 90-degree cathedral. Zoe is now hanging off a straight, sheer cliff 90 feet. Oh my god. The process bloodied up the back of my hands, but it didn't hurt. Swami belts are a bad alternative to a climbing harness, which was loops under your legs. When you hang from a harness, it's like sitting in a couple of loops of rope. When you hang from a belt around your waist, it rides up and squeezes your ribs together and compresses your lungs. I read somewhere that the pressure can suffocate you in 30 minutes. Only the purest climbers use them. Don was such a purist. This climb would be my last experience with the swami belt. In retrospect, the use of leg loops or harness might have been one of several factors which could have avoided a tragedy on this climb. I could see, as I neared the end of the rope, that it was hanging in space. I continued anyway until I had about a foot of the rope and left. Don had judged the lengths of the two ends. Left, he had judged them within inches. I could see a light, triangular shape directly below me, but I could not tell how far away it was or how flat it was. It was a shape in the gloom of darkness. It could have been anywhere from 10 to 50 feet away. I cursed the falls, the thundering cascade mist, our voices almost completely our conversation went something like this. Don't, I yelled as loud as I could. Are you? Said Don, also screaming. What? I asked. What? Asked Don. Don, I screamed, and Don answered. Are you at a stance? No, I'm out of rope. What? I'm out of rope. No answer. What should I do? Don said something that I didn't understand. What? I yelled. Can you use your belay device to climb the rope? My mind raced. I felt my belay played with my hand. I've never heard of that. should I do? I don't know, Don said. That's great, I thought. In about 1 minute, I'm going to be either suffocated to death or panic. Don's enigmatic question about what to do. The rope wasn't long enough ringing in my ears. I almost ditched my backpack. My thoughts went like this: maybe if I release the end of the rope, Don will be able to lower me to something. But how will he get down? Maybe we can make the rope longer with slings to somehow get him down. In any event, I must get down or I will lose consciousness and die of suffocation. Don, I shouted, what? If I release the top rope, can you lower me? There was a long pause before he answered, yes, I'll be stuck here or something like that. I might have said maybe we can extend the rope with slings, but I wasn't planning much beyond my immediate problem of avoiding my own death. At the end of the rope, the dark and 700 feet of air between me and the ground. Didn't matter, but it seemed like it did. Don replied, oh, okay. Okay, I asked. Yes, okay. I still had about a foot of each end of the rope through my blade. I had stopped because I didn't want the knots jammed up against it where they would get too tight to untie. I'm untying the top rope, I shouted as I untied the knot. Are you ready? What? Are you ready? I repeated as I pulled the rope through the blade. I was afraid that he'd misunderstood. If he wasn't ready and I'd let go of the rope, I'd drop. Yes, okay, I'm letting go of the top rope. I was still not convinced that he understood. Have you got me? Yes, he didn't sound impatient with my repetitive questions. He must have understood my fear. I tried to feel him on the rope. I raised it a foot and I descended a foot, just as if he hadn't been there at all. I yelled, last time, I'm letting go, and I let go. I descended immediately and smoothly. I can't remember how far down I went. It seemed at the time that it was between 10 and 20 feet. My foot landed on an upward pointing wedge-shaped rock with a 4-inch flat top, 18 inches above the light triangle, which is plenty of room for 1 foot. The triangle was about 6 feet on the side that flat and sloped sharply away from the apex. I hesitated to call a ledge, and a 45-degree angle face might be a better description. There were okay handholds on the left face and V-shaped notches for some kind of an anchor placement. I could have descended further in hopes of something better. Instead, I decided that this is good enough. There were 2 things I wanted to do right away. One was to make myself some kind of an anchor. Don had all the gear, so that would be a problem. The other was to let Don know my position. He knew that I had stopped descending and he was already yelling something out before, as we were yelling stuff at the time. Now he was even farther away. I was delighted to find 2 slings with carabiners hanging on my shoulder. One was a 9mm rope and 7 feet long. I yelled out off belay a couple of times, even though I still tied in and had no anchor, just in case he was in a precarious position himself and needed to move off the belay. I now considered her situation desperate and was willing to relax the SOP of anchoring in yourself before announcing off belay. He yelled back something like, are you at a stance? This was hard for me to answer because I was still tied to the rope and had no equipment for an anchor, and my marginal stance was more like a face than a ledge. Jesus. This is truly terrifying. I think I answered sort of, and wait a minute, Don kept yelling, and stance, and then belay, and maybe other stuff. His tone was urgent. I decided to go ahead and untie it in case he started pulling up the rope to prepare his own rappel. I was uncomfortable with my unprotected position and wanted Don to leave me alone for a minute while I caught my breath, got more secure and gathered my wits, but he kept yelling. He wasn't taking up any rope. I was working with the sling and trying to yell down at the same time. I haven't tied the knot in the 9mm scrap and pulled one end free. I was still trying to figure out how to get down. I imagined him sliding many slings down the rope end for me to extend it. I hoped that he would use leg loops on his grapple. He had shown me how to add them to his Swami belt lying on my living room floor. My mind was flooded with ideas and possible solutions, but more were flooded with obvious was done 100 feet away around a bold and noisy environment. I tied a loop into the middle of the 7-foot rope, clipped it to my Swami belt, and jammed the knot end into the shoulder-high notch. I gave a jerk and held it. That gave me a very minimal sling point anchor. Don was yelling something about belay. Why would he think I could belay him? I thought. The rope isn't long enough, and all I have is the end of it. I think he had just let go and was hanging there. Maybe he was still asking if I was off belay. I was directly below him. I yelled to Don, "You'll have to rappel." I was still trying to figure out how to get the knotted sling past Don's belay blade and hoping that Don was having some ideas of his own. He would usually come up with the solutions that had completely escaped me, but in climbing and non-climbing related problems. "What?" Don yelled. "I can't belay you. You have to rappel," I screamed. I really wanted him to rappel down to me. I wanted his know-how and his rack of gear and the ledge with me. On that ledge with me. The next thing I knew, he was on rappel. I don't know how I knew. Maybe he yelled, "Oh, rappel, on rappel." Or maybe I could hear his gear clanking or his feet scuffling. I remembered immediately that I'd left off the safety knot on the end of the rope when I passed it through my belay blade and decided that I'd remind him before he got too close to the end of the rope. Uneven doubled rope, since I had descended 10 or 20 feet. The other end of the rope should have been 20 to 40 feet up. I thought I would wait until he got a little closer into voice range to remind him there was no safety knot. As Don rappelled, I decided we may need the rope that I had used just as an anchor to extend the climbing rope for Don. I could get a head start on putting that together by lying free end of my anchor rope to the end of the climbing rope. Then I could replace my anchor rope with the piece of webbing when he started pulling up the extended rope. While I was tying the knot, Don yelled that he was suffocating. He was grunting and gasping, and I realized that he was now experiencing the terror that I experienced on my descent. But he sounded even more desperate than I had. I yelled, "There's no knot in the short rope." Don continued to say he was suffocating. He sounded very distressed. I yelled, "I know, turn upside down." He's scared. His scared grunting sounds continued, and he sounded much closer. It occurred to me that he was rappelling very fast to get relief from the suffocation. It was in danger of climbing off the rope. I yelled again, with great alarm in my voice, "There is no knot in the short rope." He finally stopped. "There isn't," he replied in disbelief. I could suddenly hear him much better. "No," I said. I was greatly relieved that he caught him in time. "Shit, it's right here." His voice had changed. He had no longer sounded like he was suffocating. "What is?" I asked. "The end of the rope." He said, "It's right here." He sounded 20 feet to 35 feet above me. His tone was amazed and befuddled. "Tie it off," I said. "I can't." "Why not?" I asked. "I've only got a quarter of an inch." Grunting, working sounds. "I'm really hung out to dry up here, Howard." His voice is suddenly calm and defeated. "Maybe Gustatory done. You have got to pull up on the rope and pull that end back." "I can't. I'm burnt." "All you need is a foot pull." "I can't. I'm burnt." He knew he was thinking that the rope drag against the rock on the rappel ring would slow him down enough to jump. He didn't know how steep the ledge was. If he could see it all, he might have thought it was flat enough to land on the back. It would have hardly even slowed him down. Hell, no you don't have enough friction, I scolded. You can make a brusic, I suggested. He normally carried a couple of brusic cords with him for emergencies. But that morning he had taken them out of his pocket and thrown them into his back, complaining, "These damn brusics are filling my pockets." I thought maybe he could use a piece of webbing or something. He didn't answer. I was torn between shouting encouragement and suggestions and shutting up to let him work. If his mind was racing like mine, he really didn't need my comments to distract him. I decided to shut up. It was dark now. I couldn't see Don at all, and he was directly above me. Something whistled by. "Hey," I yelled, "don't drop stuff, I'm right below you." Maybe he's making a brusic from a netrunner, I thought to myself, but he was probably trying to make an anchor to secure himself to the vertical crack. He had plenty of gear to do just that, and it would be the most obvious thing for him to try. And it remains a mystery why he didn't accomplish that, but somehow, at the time, incredibly, the idea escaped me. I was a beginning climber, terrified and just short of mindlessly gripping onto the rock. By now I was concerned about being tied to Don's rope. If Don fell, my knot in a crack anchor would probably not hold, and I would be pulled off behind Don. He was not on belay, but the rope realized that I was exposing myself to a huge fall and clipped back in. If he goes, maybe my dicey anchor will hold us both, I thought, and quite irrationally severing the rope link between us left like I was abandoning him. I felt like I was abandoning him. Suddenly several yards of rope dropped into my arms. I braced for the impact. "What was that, Don?" "That was it," Don said. "What?" "The end of the rope. I lost it." "Then what are you holding on to?" I asked. "A chalk I put into the crack," he grunted. "Great, put the rope through it." I was delighted. I knew he'd think of something again. I was relieved. But Don's grunt sounded more and more desperate. He only made sound. "Now, don't. Don, don't let go," I pleaded. I finally and correctly reasoned that it would not help Don for me to stay clipped to the rope. In fact, it could hurt him. My stance would negatively change the angle of impact on our knotted rope anchor, and my weight would be added to the already marginal placement. I unclipped from the rope, hopefully that my donated anchor might reduce Don's potential 200-foot fall to 100 feet. It was a hard choice because now I had no anchor at all. One foothold, one handled a black void beneath me, and my partner about to fall onto me at high speed. If my situation was improved, it wasn't by much, and Don's situation seemed to be deteriorating rapidly towards hopelessness. I braced for him to land on top of me. From the sounds he was making, I nearly certain that he would fall, and I expected him to fall. And then I expected me to fall with him. I was holding several loops of rope that I didn't know what to do with. I was afraid they would pull me off when Don fell, but I didn't want to drop them and add a few ounces to Don. It was a helpless feeling. It occurred to me, again irrationally, that if he could secure himself, I might climb the rope to help him. Thoughts of his family entered my mind. I don't know how I knew when he was falling. Probably rope noises, but I knew, and I looked up as he made one terrified vocal sound. I don't know if I saw him or not. It was very dark, but it seemed to have a memory. I seemed to have a memory of him falling face down, arms reaching out as if he hoped to grab the ledge. I yelled, "Don't! Don, don't!" as he impacted the ledge 4 or 5 feet from me. There was one bright spark from his gear, and he was gone. I couldn't tell if he bounced. I don't know what happened to the 12 to 15 feet of rope I was holding. I didn't hear him hit the was in the crack, and the anchor was not to be trusted anyway, and I didn't want pulling on it. I even thought of releasing the knot anchor and easing him down in case he was alive hanging, but I didn't know if there would be a place to lower him to. I tried to make an anchor for myself with my other sling by sharing the knot that held Don's rope. It wouldn't hold, and I finally gave up, fear of releasing Don. If he was alive, I didn't want to cut him loose. People have lived through worse. I thought. A creature in the crack screeched and scolded. My left hand was probably invading its home. I decided that if it bit me, I would kill it. After some time passed, I calmed down a bit. I was wearing only light cotton clothes, and I was getting cold. There was still snow on the ground in places, and the temperature had dropped in the low 30s. There was no moon, so I could barely see the sloping ledge below me, but I decided that I must try to sit on it. If I stood all night in the cold, I would shiver and fall. I carefully thought through my moves and slowly backed down to the ledge. It was steep, and I had enough friction to put most of my weight on my feet. I turned to wedge my left foot in the crack and sat on my right heel. I was cramped in the rock, hurt my left ankle, but it was much more secure. My palms were cold, but sweating like crazy and getting everything I touched wet. I resolved to concentrate on not shivering. I would need muscle control to stay on the rock. I decided not to think about time for that later. That's probably what saved his life. I removed my pack, clipped it to my belt, so it hung between my legs and leaned back against the rock. I began using the contents of the pack to keep warm and comfortable, being careful not to fall or do anything, drop anything. I put on my flannel shirt, changed from climbing shoes to my hiking boots, and sat on my climbing shoes after tying them to my belt with a piece of cord that gave me an insulated and non-skid butt. I found my watch, I put it on, and it lit a match to read. It was 1:15 a.m. Much more time had elapsed than I thought. I'd lost 3 or 4 hours. I still don't know why or how this happened. How did I lose that much time? Probably I was just hanging on, not thinking about much at all. I had made a hat and muffler for long underwear and put a small zipper stuffed sack over my head. I wedged both of Don's hiking boots into the crack to improve my left foot. Don's rope now ran from behind me between my left shoulder and the rock, between my left hip and the rock, and under my left foot. I was concerned that the knotted rope anchor would pop and the rope would wrap around me and knock me off. Never did go, but it added an additional amount of peril to the night. I felt the rope for movement many times in hopes that Don was alive. Yelling for help seemed a bit pointless, but I did anyway. I yelled in groups of 3 every hour in case some illegal campers were in earshot. Camping was not allowed in this area. At the start of the route, I was by this time fairly certain of surviving the night, but a few hours could mean everything for Don. I also hoped that our wives would worry enough to come looking for us. Oh my God. We were supposed to have been back home early that evening. I shifted my weight and adjusted my position many times to increase circulation. I managed with great effort to eat our raisins and granola bars. I watched the car's headlights wind their way through the valley and waited. I thought a lot about the accident. What was the main error? Had Don thought it was my fault? Was it my fault? And crazy stuff with some freak item of evidence can cause me to be suspected of murder. At first sight, I could see the piece of red nylon attached to the hex nut that had been Don's last hold. It was much higher than I thought, perhaps 40 feet above me. I couldn't see Don past my overhanging ledge. Tourists started stopping to look at the falls, and joggers ran by as early as 5:30 in the morning. Neither appeared to hear my calls. More came and went. Some walked to the viewing area at the base of the hill. After yelling repeatedly to a girl standing on the falls observation deck, I thought I could see her face looking up. I pulled off my long underwear hat and waved its full length violently. She yelled something back and continued to wave. Help, need rescue, get ranger, etc. She turned and ran down the path to the parking lot where a small crowd gathered and looked at me. It was just before 8 a.m. I was saved. The rescue. In a few minutes, a patrol car arrived, and the ranger instructed me with his loudspeaker to answer his questions with yes and no, and signals using my jaw. He was able to assess mine and my partner's situation and even guessed our names. Our wives had been badgering the park surface for most of the night, since it's quite common for climbers to be caught out after dark, and also common for friends and families to worry. A search had been initiated already. Soon another car stopped and I watched two heavily equipped climbers cross the road. More cars arrived, doors stopped, an emergency scene unfolded below. By around 10 o'clock I heard climbing gear clanking. Hello. Music to my ears. Hello, I suddenly didn't know what to say. Can you look over? I slowly stood on Dawn's wedged boots with my left leg. My joints creaked. The two climbers were standing below at Dawn's body. My first sight of him since the day before. I waved and sat back down. That was time I thought I could have fallen just then. The climbers, I would have later learned, were John Dill and Susie Harrington. John was the ranger in charge of the search and rescue in Yosemite, who I would later get to know personally. Susie is an accomplished big wall climber with a few first female ascents to her credit. If we release this rope, can you rappel down? No, I don't have any protection, I replied. You have no anchor, right? Pause. If we send some equipment up the rope, are you competent to set an anchor? I thought, sure, if I was tied in and could stretch first and could tell them exactly what I needed. I don't know, I'm a beginner climber. That's it. I thought, tell them right away that you consider yourself incompetent. That'll make the obvious necessary. Criminal investigation, especially humiliating. I was already embarrassed for my predicament. Okay, if you're alright, if you'll be alright there for a while, we'll find someone who can come up and get you. Okay, I said, a couple hours. I was starting to come down. I had a headache, aching muscles, and my tired eyes caused landscape to sparkle. I started cleaning up my nest. After a while, a climber of some renown, named Warner Braun, who I would meet socially a few years later, joined me on the rock. He quickly tied me in, set 3 or 4 anchors, and hung up my back while I stood and stretched. He then sent me off belayed, rappelled to the next belay station below overhang. Since a body was involved, the rescue operation was extensive. 17 climbers and rangers. My goodness. By eavesdropping on the radio chatter, I determined that we were having a camera malfunction and would have to delay recovery of Don's body. I was informed by a sympathetic rescuer that I would have to rappel by my friend's body. This I accomplished. Although tearfully, at the bottom I approached the officer in charge. After walking around unnoticed through the huge crowd of craning, picture-snapping tourists, I was filled with the grief of my friend's death, but happy to be alive. I was apprehensive of the possibility of meeting Don's wife at the road, but welcomed the alternative years of the investigating officer and chief park ranger who accomplished their law enforcement and public safety tasks with sympathetic ears that I had not expected from police. I spent the afternoon and evening in a daze. I talked to the rangers and my wife on the phone. Told her I loved her and made arrangements for collecting our campsite in Don's truck. I ate a sandwich and checked into a cabin with showers. The chief ranger talked to Don's wife. Several friends of Don that called. My wife joined me there later that night. So what went wrong? What should we have done to better avoid trouble? In the first place, what did we do right? must say that neither Don or I considered ourselves daredevils. Though we were not generally known to take unnecessary risks, just moderate ones. The technical difficulty of this climb was well within our abilities. The climb we thought we were taking, but not the one that we had to endure. This is so sad. So, for some reason, naming the end of the rope when I started to rappel may have saved my life. Since Don knew which end was going to be weighted, he was able to lower me. He probably did it by fully face out between the ropes and his back to the rappel ring. Oh, that's so sad. I don't know. So he continues to climb, and he would climb climbs rated at 5.10, all few, except a few that were rated 5.11, but he would never actually do the kind of climb that he had done at that day that took Don's life. Okay, these are curing, as you can see, pretty quickly. What I did here is I'm just gonna go over this. So I know it was a lot of reading today, but I also want to go over the resin. So the red was actually like a brick or bright red mixed with alcohol ink. The blue was a Persian blue, which is absolutely beautiful, and then I put in blue glass, and then the silver to give it kind of a red, white, and blue for Veterans Day this weekend, because we are doing a show. The silver being the white, of course, but I wanted to be a little bit patriotic. And then I also made, for Ohio State, I made these silver and white and red cell phone holder. Top part looks like this. So I thought that was pretty cool. I'm glad it all worked out that way. I think so. This is the two pieces together, and then they'll hook together. But this is the top, and this is the top, and this goes in this way. So then this comes out. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of hard to not hit anything. I've been having an easy time not hitting everything. Then I did those today. I don't know if you can see them, but they're what they are is actually they are a calendar with the months and days and dates of the year with your astrological signs. So I thought that was really cool. So I did a couple more bloom coasters. I did this one, which came out as so nice. I did 6 of these. I gotta trim the edge, which is simple to do. And I also did a bowl, a very nice big bowl. It's not quite all the way cured. You can tell when it's all the way cured because of the noise it makes. It sounds more like glass. Isn't that pretty? I didn't try to do bloom or anything. I actually messing around with it, and I think it came out really well. When you look at it up in the light, you can see where it's clear in some places, which make it really, really neat. But it's nice and big. See how big it is compared to. You can really put like chips or candy or popcorn, or you can make it a planter where you can put it's all food grade, so it's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to hurt anything. Not going to hurt anything. This is quite a long video today. I just wanted to read this to you, and I thought some of these stories, just incredible. And I'm going to read another one. So don't go anywhere. That was just a little break to show you kind of what I've been making. Crazy weather, and that's what happened to us this past couple weeks. Is that when we get out there, and I'll tell the story sometime, but none of us expected to get 4 feet of snow and be stuck in a mountain that our map did not recognize as a trail because the bridge had been washed out from the floods last year when I was out in Montana. And this year, what happened to us, the floods redirected the trail, completely changed the river. So what our map was telling us was not where the actual trail was, and it was not where the actual river was. We were on the right trail. The problem was that was not the trail anymore, and none of us knew that. And we never thought in a million years that would be the case. And I did extensive research. I even called the ranger's office in October 2010. Myself and a coworker, 3 friends, hiked to Half Dome. 3 of the group had done the climbing before. I had been to Yosemite but never climbed the cables. We left early in the morning and took the mist trail from the campsite. We got there early afternoon. This is also, I want to point this out, that you notice in all of these stories, their destination time dramatically changed, which ended up being a bad thing. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time, but you don't want to get on the trail too early because that's when the bears are out. So, okay, 2 of the party were not feeling well, so they stopped at the cables and did not do the climb. 3 of us continued on. About 2/3 of the way up, I started feeling odd and my vision narrowed. I seriously thought I was going to pass out. I got up to the top as quickly as I could and still wasn't feeling great, but my mental state was better seeing the views. We ate a bite, and though I was not feeling like it, we took a bunch of pictures. I spotted a curtain of rain falling a few miles away, and we decided that it was time to get down in case it started lightning. The 2 in my party got down fast, but there was a woman in front of me that was very apprehensive and having to be talked down by her partner. Halfway down, the rain hit and the rock got really slick. I was going down the cables facing down. The woman in front of me was facing up, so we were facing one another. She was about 20 yards in front of me when both of my feet slipped out in front of me and I fell. I caught the right cable under my arm and grabbed it to break my fall. The expression on the woman's face told me that she thought I was a goner. I reached over and grabbed the left cable and righted myself. I stood up and got down as quickly as I could. It all happened so fast, I really didn't have time to process it or be scared. By the time we made it back to the Park Service guy checking permits, Half Dome was veiled in rain and thundering. I recalled my story to him as we waited for our hiking group to meet up. A group of 5 came up to the guy, asked if he was going to let them pass. He explained that he was just there to check permits, but that it was raining and lightning. Showed them my arm and said it was slick. They really should consider the risk. All of them decided to go up. So I checked their permits, and off they went. He was shaking his head the entire time. To continue on. Hiker awakened suddenly to the sight of a shadowy figure crawling towards them. They tried to scream, but there is only silence, and the thick boreal forest that surrounds them for miles in every direction. Another hears whispering voices echo into the trees, but no one is around. hiker stands scintille outside a hammock, returning night after night to terrorize the hiker within. Strange things can happen under the cover of darkness, especially when you are all alone, with only a veil of your tent and a mini pocket knife to protect you. Pierce Pond is paralyzing, so you're putting up your tent in a spot that looks over a peaceful, beautiful, shimmering blue pond. Thick green trees trace the horizon that is now beaming golds, reds, and the blue of the sky as the sun settles behind it. But now think about waking up to the same view, but it is now covered under the veil of a dark night. An ominous, eerie, hazy moonlit night. You see something demonic, a creature, something on the water, working its way towards you, awkwardly moving, clacking its bones as it moves. But you can't quite make out what it is, but you can hear it. It just appears to be a shadow with hollowed eye sockets and contorted, creaky limbs that are breaking and snapping as it moves. This thing makes its way into your veil of a tent. The thin walls now desecrated by this thing, staring at you. Every muscle in your body cannot move. Your instinct is naturally telling you to run, but you can't. You go to scream for help, and you feel your vocal cords prevent you from uttering a sound. Your mind is completely awake. You know you're awake, but your body cannot move, and you have now found yourself in the sheer grip of sleep paralysis. The terrifying claws that soak into your skin, piercing the flesh, and hold you tight while your mind sees the terror that is before you. Have you ever experienced whispers, thoughts, voices, dark shadows on a trail? Think somebody is walking behind you. You can hear their footsteps as you walk and you turn and there's nobody there. Or how about the understanding that you do not have enough food and your water is gone and you're stuck and you don't know when you're going to be saved. As I walked up the Grand Portage from Lake Superior to Pigeon River, I was completely alone. I had a voices, shadows lurked behind me. The creatures that I knew might be actual animals turned into demons and spirits. I could feel them breathing their hot breath on my neck as I walked through the forest. And some young children's voices I heard singing through the trees as the wind purred through the branches. I even saw smoke come out on the path in front of me, but I really never saw anybody. I did feel a gentle breeze as I envisioned the voyagers and the first peoples to walk on this trail past me. I wasn't even scared, more fascinated with my ghost-haunted hike. Shasta with a friend. We had just settled in for the night in cowboy camping by a fire with cold beers, 2 steaks cooking. It was really quite luxurious. Then out of literally nowhere, a friend hit a tree with a log. Several times he told me this was Bigfoot country and this is how they communicate. Whatever, dude. I was a little baffled by why in the world he'd be basically calling Bigfoot to us or communicating with some fantasy creature. I don't know. Might have been the beers. I told him to try again. Why not? Shit, he'd already started the racket. He did, and several minutes later we heard 4 knocks in the distance. I shit you not. Loud ones like something big was hitting a tree. Chills trickled down my spine because I knew no one else was out here. Several minutes passed, and then it happened again. We both heard something large moving in the forest. 4 more knocks, and then 2 about 150 yards away from us. In the dark night. Immediately, both of us packed our camp as quickly as we possibly could. We could hear it moving in the forest, now 20 or 30 yards away. I have heard grizzly bears, elk, moose, etc. before, but nothing like this. I'll never forget the night that we heard Bigfoot. So, what we call lash in hiking terms, long-ass section hike. Last year from Maine to Vermont, multiple nights in the trail. I woke crying out in my sleep, according to my fellow hikers. After having a recurring nightmare, in my dream a tall, dark figure stands at the storm door of my tarp, looming over me as I sleep in my hammock. Every time I had this nightmare, it grew worse. I'd have a difficult time getting back to sleep, being overtly creeped out. The last time I had it, the figure cut the line on my hammock and I woke. I actually woke in real life due to my terrifying dream. But it wasn't just a dream. I hit the ground so hard it knocked the wind out of me. Terrifying. I have never been that scared in my life. And I've never dreamt of anything in any other hike like this other than the Appalachian us from the sky. Instant panic surged through everyone as we instantaneously sought refuge, as if it were available in the middle of the desert. Because if you've never been in the desert, there is nothing but maybe a little bush to cover you, but it is barren, and you are open to the elements. Immediately, we ran or tried to find our trail back to our car, running at full speed. I think that was part of it. We were just all so scared that we couldn't really calm down to find our way. The light, now absent of light in the sky, not like it was earlier. The next 20 minutes, the light kept flickering on and off. We finally made it back to our car in one piece, but the night was eerie. It felt wrong. The energy was heavy and thick. The air was difficult to even inhale till we got into the car, turned it on, and got to 30 miles away. Nobody can make sense what the events that took place that night. And we recall how really scared everybody was. Continuing on with our scary hiker stories, and then I'm gonna mix up some resin. My gloves are on, and I'm going to pour these. Circle, more circle. One, so I can do some blue. Some blue ones. So let me read a couple from Reddit. The skeleton. When I was 11, I went camping with my mom, her boyfriend, and my little brother. Just outside of Las Vegas, it was the middle of the desert. We went arrowhead hunting one morning. During our hike, we stumbled upon a full human skeleton lying on a blanket, kind of tucked under a bush. They were lying on their back like they fell asleep and never woke up. My mom's boyfriend knelt down and prayed over the remains. Then we all walked back to the campsite, silent, everyone in complete, utter shock. Got the ranger. My mom's boyfriend got into the helicopter to show where the remains were exactly. It turned out to be a presumed suicide of a young male. He had been missing for over a year. It was suspicious that the whole skeleton was still in contact, though. That image will forever be burned into my brain. Sinister spot. Hiked a trail with my best friend in San Francisco. Got pretty far out there by the bay, 5 miles out at least. Found an abandoned mattress. No big deal, right? We walk a little bit past it, and a string of little rodent skeletons intricately hung on it between 2 trees. Odd, but okay. Odd things happen all the time, but then we saw a burned out line of candles underneath 10 of these skeletons. Large ones. Strange. Now we're questioning, should we continue on? This looked really weird voodoo shit at this point. Then I saw my friend's name painted on a piece of wood in the middle of it by the candles. Her full name, first and last. This wood, semi-burned, shithead. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, eyes were dilated, her pupils big. She was completely freaked out. Naturally, she started to panic, became frantic. The look on her face, sheer horror and terror, clearly enough proof to me to see this is not something that she did as a joke. We ran the heck out of there as fast as we could and never ever hiked that trail again. Thank God nothing ever happened to her after that, but never told anyone about it. I still remember this 25 years later. I still shudder when I think about it. Never found out who was behind it, but how would anybody know we were there that day, or we were going to? It had to have been somebody you knew. A scream in the wind. I took an ill-advised winter hike in a storm. The wind coming off the peak down the ridge at around 50 miles per hour. I was ascending. At this point, there was snow on my ridge that was about shin deep and getting thicker. We had 800 feet to the summit, getting darker, and the wind picked up even stronger. We both heard a long, terrible scream up ahead, a torturous, painful scream. The wind picked up again. It had to have been 80 miles an hour at this point in gusts. We rejected the attempt and made our way back to the tent. I thought I could hear a helicopter in and out of the wind gusts, but in the dark, we couldn't see anything. Next afternoon was a news report of one dead after falling from a ridge during a military exercise. It was from the summit ridge line we were heading for. We both heard that man fall. Oh my gosh. The stench of death. The stench of death. I stumbled upon a poaching dump when I was 14. I used to hike trails near home way out in the woods. I would explore and then have to find my way back without a compass. One day I went really far out, probably 2 or 3 miles, through these old logging trails. A smell started to emanate from ahead of me. It was awful, making me sick. There was a rocky outcrop right before a steep cliff, and at the bottom of the cliff there was a massive pile of dead deer. Most were decapitated. Some were fawns. Oh, had to be 20 or 30 of them in varying states of decay. The stench was mind-alteringly bad. I thought I had enough, that I'd seen enough. I'd never seen anything like this before. I heard 4-wheelers and decided to hide. 2 poachers in camp rolled up and tossed 2 more deer carcasses on the pile. They smoke talked and then left about 10 minutes. I was probably 15 feet from them the entire time, hiding under a hemlock tree. I did not recognize either of them, and I knew absolutely everyone on that entire side of town. It was only 15 to 20 houses in a 5-mile stretch. I ran my ass home. I told my parents. They didn't believe me. They didn't know I was running off to those trails either, so I got in a lot of trouble for that. I mentioned it to our neighbor who was big into hunting. He seemed very concerned and brushed shotgun shell booby trap was in tall grass inside a pipe with a nail behind the shell. We managed to disassemble it, but who knows what would have happened if we took one wrong step. Mystery ritual. I was hiking along with my dog. 6 of the 7-mile loop, I ran into a group of men. One was wearing a monk's robe and had no hair at all on his head. The other 2 men were wearing all white, kneeling in front of the bald man humming. The bald man and I made eye contact, and he tells me life is a gift. When he finished that sentence, both the kneeling men stopped humming, snapped their heads back to look at me. I panicked and just say, "The heck it is," and kept walking. The 2 other guys started humming again, but I could feel the bald man's eyes burning a hole in the back of my head as I hiked up the switch back to the car. Okay. Ghost guy. In 2015, I was on a hiking trail in Arizona. I've hiked a lot worse terrain in Europe. I was not too worried about going alone. Almost dark. I was at an eerily deserted stretch for what I felt like was hours. All of a sudden I heard a kind of music playing. I kept going. I realized it was someone whistling, but it sounded a little off. Chills ran through my body and down my spine. The idea of company kind of relieved me a bit too, but there was something about that whistle. And soon enough I saw a man in front of me walking the same direction. He was wearing a t-shirt, pants, and a hat, which was surprisingly adequate for the impending night. I passed him by. He was the one whistling. Indeed. I turned to say the usual hello. He looked up, deadpan, and without a word turned back down towards the ground and kept whistling. He was walking oddly slow, almost in a trance-like manner. I quickly averted my gaze forward. Almost abruptly, the whistling stopped. I turned back to see what happened, and there was absolutely nobody on the trail. Zilch, nada, nothing. Didn't even feel like anyone had ever been there. I'm not crazy. I do not suffer any mental illnesses. I do not do drugs. Needless to say, I flipped the fuck out. I made it back to my car without any further issues, but I still think about what I saw and heard that night in the middle of the desert. My best friend and I went for an early trail run one morning. It was in the summer and it was quite warm. dismember this animal. They dragged parts off the trail and buried it. It was so surreal to be in the middle of such beauty, but also this grisly scene as well. I've been hiking and backpacking for 25 years. I've seen bears, mountain lions, exotic prints that I don't know, and of course all the usual, but honestly the scariest thing has always been other people. I completely agree. Not people I think are going to attack me, people I think are going to die. The number of people I see miles from the trailhead with just a t-shirt and shorts and nothing else. Nothing in their hands, no bag, no water, no food, no hat, no extra layers, compass, rain gear, etc. The worst was when I was 6 miles into a backpacking trip, nearly dark. I'd been hiking a couple hours at this point. In the dark before I made camp, this guy with nothing but shorts and a t-shirt passed me, headed in the other direction. He was going to be in pitch black soon, with no headlamp or jacket or food. He looked stressed out. Mystery note. Late 90s. I was in my junior year of high school and hiking up Usery Mountain in East Mesa, Arizona. My best bud and 2 girls we liked. We reached the wind cave at the top, but wanted to keep going, so we scrambled up to the summit to take in the view. My friend was sitting on a rock and noticed an old rusty Altoids tin box, picked it up. Inside were 2 folded up pieces of white paper, which he spread out on the rock. The first page was a crude sketch of the view from that exact spot, drawn in pencil with the caption, "The last dew from Hannah's eyes," with the date. I would believe it was only some months or a year past. The second was an apology letter listing people in this person's life and things they were sorry to have said or did. We surmised that it was a suicide note and started searching the backside of the usury for anything, something. Remains, clothes, more clues, but nothing. This is in the late 90s and internet search was not really a thing. We went to the Central Mesa Library to sort through the microfiche pile, skimming through newspaper articles. A little after the date on the drawing for a lost person notice or any news related, and again, nothing. Scary and creepy and sad all at the same time. I don't know, it was kind of fun feeling like a detective for a day. I did 4:05, what did I say, 4:10. It's getting thicker though, and it's starting to heat up. I can feel the temperature in my hand getting warmer. That is what is so important. You really have to get to know what the temperature feels like when it is ready to pour, if you know what I mean. Terrifying hiking stories. From getting lost, to being killed, to losing a friend, to starving to death. There have been countless accounts of people getting lost, children getting lost, people dying and losing friends. You've got to be careful. In nature, you do not know what lies in the dark, waiting for you to come out and play, waiting for you to come check out the stars when you're most vulnerable, when you're most vulnerable. Do that. I love you guys. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's rendition of a truly scary